All right, so what are we going to talk about today? So I think the title from the webinar was slightly different, but what we want to talk about today is the anatomy of our own internal data agent and how we manage our more sophisticated agents and agentic workflow internally at Preset. And clearly, like a big part of that is Preset MCP, which we shipped recently, and we use a lot of our own chatbot internally, but we do much more sophisticated things too behind the scene. And that's what we want to cover today. We're going to do some quick intros, though you've probably been to one of our webinars, so you probably know me and Evan. What I like to say about me is I'm a founder at Preset. I started Apache Superset, Apache Airflow a while ago. Excuse me. And then kind of my passion, my life mission is to really kind of take over the data space with open source. I've got this deep belief that open source is the right way to build software, and that open source should win in a lot of areas and verticals. And at Preset, we're really pushing to get open source to not only succeed, but thrive in everything data and analytics. If anyone to do a quick intro too.
Yeah, so I've been with Preset for about 7 years now, and I have done a lot of things, but in recent years, I've been more on the developer relations and community side and doing marketing as well. So many of you have probably seen me on the repo and on Slack. I care an awful lot about Superset. I'm a PMC member on the project and a Apache Software Foundation member as well. So if you have questions about open source and Superset and getting involved in the project and its roadmap and how Preset differentiates and all of that stuff, then by all means, just hit me up on Superset Slack and let's get connected.
Yeah, I think Evan dethroned me as was one of the main Superset contributor quite a while ago already. So he's very very active on the repo and everywhere else in and around Preset. Sweet. So this is like the rough agenda for today, but we're gonna do. So I'm gonna start by doing a bit of a rebase on where exactly are we at with AI, or at least from my perspective. I feel like I'm super tuned into everything that's happening in and around AI, and I wanted to kind of rebase, bring everyone to kind of my thinking. I think I'm realizing too that organizations and people are all over the place in terms of like sophistication with AI. So there's folks that are, very much leaders and early adopters and know everything that's happening. And there's quite a few laggers too. And there's like this wide distribution. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of share from my perspective the big things happening in AI. The next thing we want to cover, and that's really like the main topic for this presentation today. So it's to talk about your analytics agents, like what do they need to be deeply helpful? And then we'll pivot into how we built our own internal analytics agent at Preset, how it's built on top of some of the preset tooling we have, but on top of so many other things too that make this agent much more powerful. Then we're going to get into an Agor demo. So Agor is an agent orchestration toolkit platform that we've built internally at Preset. So you can think of it like it's a Preset Labs type of offering, something we built for ourselves that we open source, that we think is super cool, that we think everyone should play with. And, we very much think that everyone should be building these like super powerful, long-lived agents with memory systems and skills and access to MCP. And this is the toolkit that we use internally, that we've open source, and that we want to encourage people to try out. So we're going to be talking about that, and then just closing remarks and statements on what's coming up. Yeah. So next thing, so I want to start by saying like rebasing on AI and like maybe my own perspective on the big things that happened last year, and then we'll talk about what's happening this year and some of the trends. But the first, so last year was huge year. These 4 bullets don't even start to be capturing what all happened. last year, but some of the big things. So MCP dropped, I think, at the end of 2024, but really started to get steam in 2025. And that became a widely adopted standard. And I remember last year, so I've got this screenshot to a blog post I wrote about a year ago. But when MCP was early, like quickly I saw like once all products have MCPs, once we have all these MCP tools, and we're going to be able to combine them, that's really when the magic's going to happen. And here we are today where this has actually happened. Claude Code dropped, and all the followers, Codex, Gemini CLI, Cursor got good, but like the tooling, the harnesses got really good. I think this is the moment where a lot of us realize that we might never code again, or at least not the same way. So that was extremely disruptive. I think I had my own personal Claude Code moment about this time last year, maybe a few months earlier last year. But that was a big shift. The models got really good. I think a lot of people identify like November, December as when the models really got good to a point where coding was going to change forever, but not just coding, like everything was going to change. So models got good, and then OpenClaw dropped towards the end of the year. I think like the press coverage that it got kind of missed the point on what was important about the OpenClaw news, but it's really, to me, about getting a glimpse onto what happens when you have a persisted agent with a memory system, with a skill system, with access to context, that is like kind of accessible anywhere. So that was big news, and I think like that's been shaping a lot of the work in the industry since then. Anything else I'm missing from last year, like big events?
I don't think so. I was just asking a little survey question in the chat though, of like if you're a software engineer, when's the last time you wrote a function by hand? Or maybe, if you're a data engineer, how often, I hope you still write some SQL by hand. But pretty much you can generate. So what percentage of SQL are you writing by hand?
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I typed a function. It's
Yeah.
and I think I might never do it again unless like I feel like retro. I'm nostalgic about this era, the previous era. All right, so what's happening this year from my perspective again? So I think this idea of like MCP skill context composition, right? Like I call it like agent modeling, but idea there is like you start to bring a few MCPs together, a few skills together, access to the right context. People started doing that, and with extremely good results. Agent orchestration. So the tools, I think the models as of the fall got really good at using tools and understanding concepts around orchestration. So that's a big thing. Something that's been happening, I would say, since people have had their Claude Code moment, is the PDLC is changing. The bottlenecks have shifted. I think teams are actively changing the way they work together. That's still something we're actively figuring out right now. But I think like the product development lifecycle and how humans work together with themselves or with each other with agents is changing extremely fast. The roles are collapsing, so I think like generalists are doing very well. I think we're all kind of pushed towards being more generalists, valuing like the breadth of skills over the depth of skills. So that's something that's happening. There's better models coming, probably like 3 or 4 waves of like big frontier models happening this year. Agents get access to everything, which makes you really think about how should your agents have access to systems or data or context. Agent identity is a big question too, of like, do your agent borrow your credentials to get access to system, or do they have their own like role-based access control and their own identity? So I think we're figuring this out actively this year. end of subsidies. So we've had tokens that are highly subsidized, which is great, and we should all take advantage of the Claude Max Pro plan and use and abuse it. But that might not work forever. But on the flip side of that, there is token efficiency is also on the rise. I think GPT-5.5 being like kind of in a different league of its own in terms of it's not just about how many tokens you use, but it's also like how many tokens are needed or it's not just about the cost of tokens, about how efficient these tokens are. Some of the things that are more on the tired side of the house, at least like, as far as I'm concerned. So RAG is kind of dead, replaced by tools. Vector database was kind of a big thing. I'm not saying they're useless, but I think they're less interesting and important now that we figure out the file system is a great place for memory systems and context and knowledge in general. Similar with semantic search, I think the agile methodology we need to completely rethink. IDEs, I don't know if we still need IDEs. Like, who likes IDEs? Maybe that's a question there of like, do you still use an IDE? Do you still think you're going to be using the traditional IDE in a year? But maybe changing in relevance or like the design patterns there might change. And then knowledge graphs, I put in a tired list, not because I don't think they're relevant. I think they're super interesting and relevant. So context engineering, very important. Knowledge graph is a solution for context organization, but I think a lot of us are in a phase now where all that matters is getting access to the knowledge to your agent wherever it lives, right? So if you want to use Notion as your wiki, Notion, a repo, Google Drive as your knowledge, storage, the only thing that's important is making sure your agent has access to the context it needs wherever it lives.
Maybe one tiny little question, if we can. I know it's its own talk, and I don't want to make it a leading question since we get into some of it, but it's hard to stay on top of all this change as an individual, and it changes how we work as individuals. But you've got this concept, I think you coined a term of the AI enablement engineer, and how do you see this affecting teams and how they keep each other leveled up?
Right. It's like, how do you keep up with
Yeah.
everything that's happening? Well, maybe, attending a talk, I was at a conference last week where it allowed me to kind of catch up on everything that's happening. I think there's so many resources, maybe too many resources, but like YouTube is a huge source for me. I know something interesting, like dig.com came back with like an AI focus. That's kind of
Really?
cool. So they monitor everything that's happening on Twitter. Twitter is kind of a shit show, but as all of the information, by the minute. So it's a little bit like, drinking from the fire hose, but, talk to people, organize brown bags. We should have more organization to organization sharing sessions, like comparing notes. But I think that work of like keeping up with what's happening is highly relevant,
Okay.
so probably worthwhile for anyone to spend 10-20% of their time just trying to keep up research, try to follow on everything that's happening. Okay, so this is the high shock value, and it's kind of self-evident too, but maybe that's like some of the premise for this talk. So your agents are very limited to their interfaces, and we went from like a year or two ago from like start a ChatGPT session, copy paste things, and then go take action in the tool. So there's a lot of copy pasting, but the realization that your agents can only be useful as the interfaces that you give them, both to get access to context, fetch context, but also to take action. So if you have an agent that doesn't have arms and is blindfolded, it doesn't matter how intelligent the model it's running is. So kind of premise, an idea. I think it's self-evident, but also interesting to think about. So now I'm going to pivot into talking about DatAgor, which is Preset's internal AI data engineer. And interestingly, I did a blog post. Actually, I asked DatAgor to write a blog post about itself. So this is very like mold book if you follow the OpenClaw mold book thing. But I asked my agent to write a blog post, but it's a pretty decent blog post where the agent explained like how it was set up, what it has access to, the kind of things that it can do, which we're going to cover today. But that's a good reference blog post if you're interested to learn more about how we kind of the making of and who is this internal data engineer. And it's built on Agor, which we're going to do a demo around. This is kind of the foundation of like where it's set up and where it's connected and where it's operating. So think of it like Agor is the control plane or the operating command center where Agor and a lot of our other agents and agentic workflows are taking place at Preset. More on Agor in a minute. So this is showing like our high-level data flow diagram at Preset. This is not a talk about how we do data at Preset, but the thing that's interesting here is we're a fairly small company at Preset. We're not like, a Meta or an Airbnb or some of the places that I worked at before, but it shows how even modest size teams of data teams have complex data platform. And the reality is that if you want to do any meaningful work as a data professional, you're going to need access to all of these systems, and you're going to need to kind of SaaS hop from a system to another. And point being that your agent's going to need access to your data platform to do any kind of meaningful data work, right? And the more you give it, the more it can do in many capacity. So here I'm going to go into the abstract a little bit of like, if you build a super analytics agent to support your organization's data need, but also like the internal data need of your data team, you're going to need access to a bunch of things. And here, this is the more abstract slide. So it's less about what our own agent has access to, but like if you go build your own agent, you should consider giving it access to as many as these things as possible as red tape will allow you to do. So the first thing on the side is, I think, like depending on the use case, and I'm thinking on the left area is more about if you want an agent that's going to answer analytics question to your business users or like people that are not data professional inside of your organization, you're going to need something like this. And for us, this is very much like what Preset MCP, Superset MCP exposes to the agent. So there's a lot of question use cases, helpful stuff an agent can do if it has only access to these things. So this is like, call it your analytics platform, your BI tool, having some sort of skill, an API or an MCP tool for your agent to have access to your organization's charts, dashboards, data set, your semantic layers, if you have them. By the way, we've been doing a big push at Preset to support all the semantic layers. We think the semantic layer can be super useful in the AI era. So we're moving towards like supporting all the semantic layers. Tons of really important information about your business, your data, how to query it. So this is super useful. Visualization engine. So your agent needs to be able to craft the data visualization for you and show it to you. I still believe that, data visualization is highly relevant in this era because it's like such a great medium for people to exchange, high density information, right? It taps into your own little visual cortex, your human GPU, and that allows the agent to show you information in a way that you can understand very quickly. So your agent should have access to these things. It's really great if it can have SQL access, preferably to some sort of data access layer, right? So whenever you talk about data access, you have to think about data access policy and who should have access to what. And you start thinking about things like having a good caching system, having, like all the data access policy and row level security and dataset level security. So you really need some sort of data access layer. For us, that lives inside Preset MCP, right? So Preset MCP exposes a way for agents to run SQL, and it fully respects your data access layer, data access policy. And then context and docs, right? You probably have some data warehouse documentation and how to query our data warehouse in our organization. So that's all super useful. Some of it lives in the semantic layer. Some of it can live on other context and docs that your agent should have access to. Next step is now I'm thinking about like enabling more like members of your data team, like people that have data inside their job title. So here we have found that magic happens once your agent has access to your data pipeline source code. Modern agents like our agents operating in Claude Code Codex can do very well with code. So regardless of how big this data pipeline repository is, if your agent has access to it, it gets all sorts of extra semantics that might not exist in the semantic layer. So examples of that is like all this data lineage information, data provenance, how metrics are computed, right? So when your agent has access to source code, it could capture all sorts of transformation level semantics and sometimes business semantics. So super useful. More advanced docs, access to your orchestrator. So if you use, Airflow or Databricks or whatever it might be, if your agent is able to see if the data pipeline ran today, or if it's behind or something like that, that's super useful. So connection to your data ops type services, presumably through Skills or MCP, and a way to submit PRs, right? So often you have a data question and you realize that you're missing something in your data, and being able to tell your agent like, oh, this customer property in HubSpot is not available in the table I'm querying. Like, can you open a pull request to fix the data pipeline or to enhance it in some capacity? And then the gravy. So like some of the things like in the abstract that are really cool is if your agent as a memory system has got a skill system, is able to not only read your documentation, but improve your documentation. So in the process of answering a question, your agent might be able to improve your docs, which helps the next agent coming along. This one is interesting too. So the source and destination access. So if you look back at our data flow diagram, if I get back to it, we have all these sources and destination. HubSpot's a big one for us. So if your data agent can have access to HubSpot MCP, it's going to be that much more useful, right? It can go end to end of like looking at the source data, what exactly, say, this customer property looks in HubSpot, how it gets carried through the warehouse, I get reverse ETL somewhere else. There's definitely useful things if your agents have access to the sources, destination. If you have a ticketing system, super useful for the agent to have to keep track of what it's doing, pick up some tasks. Data dictionary. Oh yeah, there's this idea of the soft semantic layer, which I think is really interesting, but traditional semantic layers are very rigid. What I call a soft semantic layer is essentially like markdown that explains to your agent how to query your database or what's reliable or what's in the schema. Super useful. And then I would say the cherry on top, which is really cool, is if your agent can be available on Slack, is great. Like, so you don't have to tell someone to fire up a Claude Code session. There are non-technical users, or it's just convenient to get your agents on Slack. So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, and maybe there's kind of a side question for the chat or future YouTube commenters around what this enables or what you'd like it to enable. Like, I am not a data engineer by background, so I never, wrote a lot of DBT workflows and jobs and stuff, but now I'm using DatAgor to do that all the time, to munge data and backfill things and schedule stuff. And it's a whole new capability. So if you could, as these agents become giant Swiss Army knives that are capable of connecting to anything and everything, what sort of magic wand would you want to wave to give yourself a new capability? I guess I'm curious
Or
what people
what,
want.
the use case question is interesting. Like once you do all this, because I spoke about the mechanics, like if you connect your agent to all these things, it's going to be able to do amazing things. And what are these things that we're talking about? I would say like broadly, it can support anyone in your data team, data engineers, analyst engineers, data ops people, to do everything they do uh, in a much better way, potentially. So that becomes like support for all of what typically a data platform or a data team might or might not do. We haven't talked about agency too, but I would say DatAgor is mostly an assistant for people doing data work, or that's one of the use cases, but it's also a self-service tool so that someone who's not a data professional can still say, fix the pipeline, right? It's behind, or I really need these 3 properties carried over from, maybe I create new properties in HubSpot and I want it in this schema or model, right? And then it becomes possible for everyone to do some of the work that the data team can do. Of course, there's like trust and oversight, and should you let anyone in the organization, submit pull requests, around that. And I think like the question there is like, what is the human in the loop, and how much agency you want to give to your agents?
Yeah, I've got some questions about that I want to dive into later. We've got the modern data pile, I guess, as we call it. It used to be more of a
Modern
stack.
data stack.
Yeah, now it's a pile, I think. But how do agents become properly enabled so that they're using the right skills and MCP tools and CLIs and everything, APIs, everything in the right ways at the right time? How do we kind of establish those best practices and guardrails for agents? And then that also leads to the trust and security question around when agents are connected to everything everywhere, how do we not have what people perceive as the dangers of things like OpenClaw?
At a high level, the concept is that DatAgor has access to all of these things. One thing I did not mention clearly is that DatAgor has access to these systems through the operator's credential. So if someone in marketing that doesn't have access to all these things tries to use their DatAgor won't have access to the things they don't have access to. So, in our case, it's kind of a lease on the data access rules for the users that using it. So that will be respected. Trust, I think, mapping out what the agents can do well and what they can't do as well, and figuring out where the human in the loop and the level of oversight for different tasks is very much like the name of the game for what we're doing right now. So I think like this thing, I think, is very subjective depending on the model that you use, the task at hand, which could be anything. Anyone could ask anything to DatAgor. But I think it's like, because we're in a multiplayer system, we're going to demo in a minute. It's really easy to bring a data professional to your session, right? So if you're on Slack asking DatAgor for something that potentially hard or dubious, other team members that are a true data professional can come in and oversee your session, take over your session. Cool. So I'm going to go very quickly on this, but like basically this slide is the visual on this, like what is DatAgor? What does it have access to? This is all the things for us, but it's essentially connecting to all of our systems. There's some, and very much like Preset MCP as the core, the foundation for a lot of data questions. And then SUP is also a tool that is part of the Preset ecosystem, so that enables agent to do certain things more like administrative workflows. And then pretty much everything else on here. So I'm going to talk about Agor. So Agor, the 2 letters. So why this name? It stands for agent orchestration, but this is an open source tool that we've built internally at Preset Labs that we use a lot for everything agentic, from agent coding to building our own agents, building like that becomes the home for DatAgor and all sorts of other internal agents that we have that are available on Slack. So this is a bit of a community talk on like, you should really check out Agor. It's really cool. That's how we built our DatAgor, and more on that. And I believe, yeah, so at a high level, and I think I'll get into the demo, but it's very much like a multiplayer place for agentic coding. So it's a great GUI on top of Claude Code SDK, Codex SDK, Gemini, Open Code. So you're not pigeonholed into one of the frontier model company. It is kind of open claw for teams, but it's a way to create these like long-lived, non-ephemeral agents with memory system, with skills. It's also a way for us to make these agents available on our Slack and in GitHub and other, channels. It's open source, and we'll get into the demo. And maybe I'll show this slide because it's kind of cool. What's his name again? Is it Bernie? This one?
Ernie.
Ernie. I didn't grow up with Sesame Street. All right. So I'm taking you to actually our own prod instance of Agor that we run at Preset. And there is a lot to learn and there is a lot to show. We have about 10 minutes to try to cover as much as we can. And I'm going to start at a very high level here. So what is Agor? It is a place that you can go to work with agent, with doing agent coding, working with agents. So here, what you see is my own board that I use for software development daily. So this is where I orchestrate my agent, but this is also where many people at Preset, everyone has access, is also managing their boards, setting up agents, doing all sorts of workflows in here. So what are we looking at? If you're familiar with Figma, this is like a very kind of spatial, board-oriented UI, and you'll recognize some constructs that are akin of a Kanban type of flow. So just to explain a little bit more about what we're looking at here. So each card in Agor is a Git branch, essentially, a Git work tree. So this is a place on a repo. So here I'm working on the Agor repo itself. I'm working in the branch, and each one of these branch can have one or many Agor sessions. So this is a this happens to be a product development work tree. Something that's really interesting here is that this is built on top of all the different SDKs, or a bunch of popular SDK, but things like the Claude Agent SDK, the Codex SDK, Gemini. So if you work in Agor, you're not stuck with only the Anthropic stack, right? A lot of the vendors now are trying to kind of like lock you into their ecosystem, like Claude Code work and all these things. They want to bring your workflow there. So here you can work with all of these different SDKs. So that's important to know. And these work trees can have one or many sessions. I could add a Codex session over here. You could have like multiple sessions going on. Maybe a quick point or two. So there's some hooks in configuration that allows you to start environments. So if you want to start a Docker environment for this feature, this work tree, it's really easy to do so. I'm looking for perhaps a different one, but over here, once you have a pull request attached to your feature and issue, you can see that here too. So high level, this is how this works. The zones, just to show, zone is a way to organize your workflows. So this is my own particular workflow with my own zone, but each zone can have a templated prompt. So that means that when I drag a task from this area to this area, it will submit this prompt. So it's a way to, maybe as a team, you're able to standardize some of your prompts and some of your workflow. So that's a super high level, spatial place to manage your AI sessions and organize your workflow. And you can see that at Preset, we have tons of boards. So these are all various boards. Maybe I'll go to the marketing website blog where I think we wanted to do a bit of a demo here, but
yeah, very light one.
This
repo is my bread and butter.
That's where Evan's been working. I think we should see Evan's cursor kind of show up, but it's a little bit like Figma where you see, you'll see other people's cursors come in, and there's this possibility of prompting each other's session. So here I was going to ask with Whisperflow, so how many blog posts have we written this year so far? So normal, like, on the right side here, you're pretty much in a Claude Code session with all sorts of goodies. So here, Evan can follow up with the following blog post, but here we're inside a work tree on our marketing website repo, tons
So
of
then,
configuration. So
yeah, so
yeah,
then I'll ask, what are the top 5 topics that we've written about in those blog posts?
so talking about like some of the challenges that led to create Agor, I think one is that you might be able to relate to if you're doing a lot of agentic coding is keeping track of all the stuff you're doing. I had the problem personally where I had so many terminal windows open and so many pull requests and Docker environments. I couldn't see clearly through a lot of this. So, the spatial layout is where it enables people to organize or visually use your spatial memory to be able to keep track of things. So that's one thing. The other thing is like the issue with everyone living in their own local. So AI sessions have been so private and isolated, right? So Evan might be working on a thing with an agent someplace or with 12 agents. I'm working on my things. There's kind of no way to share and collaborate. So that's
Yeah, I think
something.
that was one of the early conversations that led to this, is everybody was trying to hack around Tmux and WeMux and whatever else to share sessions, because really the value is that if you ask a question and get some insight, I might be able to double down on that and find even more. And sharing those results is kind of what dashboards and everything are all built about.
Yeah, it's like collaborative agent encoding AI, and then there's so much more to it. So here I'm opening the settings panel so you can see a little bit more of the information architecture and everything that can be done. And I'm going to try to wrap up quickly on the demo, but you got your boards, you get your repos, you get your work trees. Those are the branches where work takes place. And then assistant. So if we look for DatAgor, that is our data agent, it lives somewhere in here. Actually, yeah, so it's somewhere on the screen, but this is just one of the agents that we have. We'll go back to slides and talk about some of the other agents that we've built. But these assistants are these like long-lived assistants similar to OpenClaw memory system, skill system. They can be made available through Slack, GitHub, other gateway channel through this configuration over here. So if you create an assistant in here, you can make it available elsewhere. The other only thing I'm going to get into, so there's also like a lot of configuration in here. So this is where we have like all the MCPs for the tools that we use every day. So you don't have to like we can configure an MCP centrally and the entire team can use it, which is really cool. The last thing I'm going to talk about is artifacts, which are something that's disrupting the world of dashboards in some ways today. So these artifacts are these mini JavaScript app that an agent can create and put on a board. And I will go into a board where I have a bunch of these artifacts, but they're really just these little JavaScript apps that can be created by agents and made available to people. So here you'll see how much some of the money we spend on Agor specifically, but you can see, this is the curve of how much money we spend with AI through Agor specifically, right? So we do have a lot of workflows with AI that don't necessarily take place here. But this is super interesting thing too. So as part of this platform, agents can create these little application and socialize them, share them with others, which is really cool. And I
Yeah.
think that's the demo. I know that's a lot to absorb too. You're like, what is this thing? What all does it do? There's probably a lot of questions out there. I think the call to action is to tell people to go check it out. Maybe I'll get into that. Maybe Evan, do you want to talk about some of the other agents we have happening at Preset too?
Yeah, there's there's a lot of them. I think you took inventory today, and there's something like 70 of them floating around in various levels of activity. But we have a bunch, and the cool thing about these is, like Max said, you can connect them to various MCP services, various CLIs, APIs, skills, you name it. So they have their own personality, their own role, their own cycles of stuff that they check in on so they can work while you sleep. And then they can surface themselves on Slack or anywhere else. And we have a bunch of them in different departments at Preset. I've got the next slide is actually about some of them that you can show.
Yeah,
DatAgor
I
here.
missed that as part of my demo as we started to run out of time. So I created just a channel here to show how DatAgor is accessible on our Slack. So that makes it, widely available to everyone internally at Preset with the right security measure. We haven't talked about role-based access control, but not all agents have access to all the tools. And then depending on who's prompting the agent, they may or may not have access, or the agent might or might not have access to the right system. So we taught through some of the security stuff that say OpenClaw did not think about to get it right. So here is an example where I tagged DatAgor, that's on our Slack, and I asked it to kind of introduce itself and talk about itself. So it talks a little bit about how it works and some of the highest impact work it has done, from improving our data pipeline to answering critical business questions. So super cool stuff. And then I just prompted as we entered here an ETL error saying like, hey, I've got this stack trace, something something needs to be looked into. And what you see is that you'll get an answer here and you get a link to the Agor session, which is cool. So you have the choice to go see what's happening in Agor, or just stay here in Slack and do a lot of your work here. So, this is a framework that enables you to automate pretty much everything in your business that can become an agentic workflow. I didn't mention there's also a scheduling system. These agents they have this concept of a heartbeat. There's a scheduler in Agor. So that means that the agents can be instructed to produce weekly reports, for instance, or to, I don't know, go read what's happening in the news, do competitive intel, produce a report daily or weekly. So all these things are possible.
Like Max pointed out, there's a link to eject to an Agor session from any of these chats. And I think what's great about this for most of our use is that any of our teams have a number of agents that we tend to interact with first on Slack, where you ask a question, you get an answer, and that's fantastic. But we were talking about trust and security and validation of stuff, whether it's SQL or data viz or you name it. And that becomes very important. So to be able to eject to that session, go see what kind of thinking it did, where it's pulling data from, ask those follow-up questions where it can kind of prove itself are very important still. You're still the analyst, and if you're making business decisions based on a lot of this stuff, you really do want to kind of double click and dig in and go into that session and learn more. But that said, these are just a few examples of the agents that we're using in kind of the sales and ops and even marketing roles here at Preset. They're based on fictitious characters, obviously, but they all have their different purpose. And they kind of report to us daily about prospects and customers and engagement and deals that are open and legal questions and all of it. So like Wendy, for example, kind of tells us what's in the news about competitors and other activity in our space, and tells us kind of how we should think about our product and have our little retort to whatever's happening in the industry, or keep our customers happy. Who should we reach out to as champions, or who needs a little support? All of that stuff becomes incredibly valuable as a daily report, and to have that subject matter expert that knows everything because they're connected to your HubSpot, your Rio Dev, your Apollo, whatever systems you use in your org to keep up with your customers. It has all the stuff to answer all your questions.
It's very democratized in some ways, right? So creating a new agent is as simple as giving it a name, picking an emoji for it, give a description, and it will create its own board. And then the onboarding system is very much like OpenClaw in some ways, where you enter a session and your agent is like, this is my first boot. Like, who are you? Who am I? What do you want to work on? What should I connect myself to? Right. So creating one of these persisted agent with memory system with skills becomes something that anyone in your organization can do, provided that they have the access and they can connect this agent to the relevant resource. And I know we are starting to be about time, but we schedule 45 minutes, so we have time for Q&A. So I understand if people got to leave, have other things, but we're going to from here, do Q&A. We're going to wrap up quickly and do Q&A. So the first thing is some of the learnings from Preset Labs is that the magic really happens when you start combining MCP skills, context, memory system. Really encourage people to start looking in that direction and start thinking about agent modeling, like what should be the scope of an agent, a little bit like we think of the scope of an employee in some ways. And then, urging people to consider Agor as a command center for your agent. So if you want to check it out, you can pretty much just go to agor.live and go straight into the getting started. And it's, you could literally have it running before the end of the Q&A today. So it's super easy to install, super powerful. Other thing I wanted to mention, so getting started. So this is a new open source project we're super excited about. So check it out. But you can start playing with it if you want today. Start building your own analytics agent or legal agent or whatever it may be. And then we're looking for feedback too. So we've been building this for ourselves. It's transforming our business in a lot of ways. It's transforming our own like personal work. So I encourage people to give it a shot and try it. Maybe a little sneak peek that we didn't have. So our own internal data agent at Preset is somewhat like limited to the world of Preset, which has a lot. It has all your charts, dashboard, data sets. It has its own, system prompts and everything. So it's really powerful, but we want to enable our customers to get the power of Agor, enable their Preset Chatbot to connect to other things, and using Agor as a control plane for what I would call like Preset Agent 2.0. So that's one thing. Also encouraging people to go tap in this platform. And
we're definitely looking to connect with people to get early feedback on this, get some people on Zoom to kind of provide some, sort of user testing focus group feedback. We want to make this the best product it can be and figure out all the right ways to integrate it with everything, including but not limited to Preset. So we're looking to have you involved. By all means, fill out that form, get in touch, and we'll get you on the roster.
so super excited about just connecting with people too. So if you want to get in touch with the team about this and with follow-up questions, so, we're really curious about what people are doing with AI and whether this strikes a chord for y'all.
Let's see, question one. So people are managing dashboards as code, or they would like to while they're making dashboards in the UI, but they want to have them in a repo. So their goal is to facilitate this transition to managing their dashboards as code using agents. How does that play out in this particular world?
Yeah, so we have, I don't know, I think we have done a webinar on SUP, the Superset CLI or Preset Superset CLI, and that is a very comprehensive CLI that agents do very well with, and humans too, because it's like a very intelligible, great CLI that enables you to sync assets. It allows you to push and pull your preset dashboards and charts and dataset definition as code. So I would point in that direction. So check out SUP. Let me dig out the link.
That is definitely possible through Preset CLI, through SUP. It's just more integrations and powers to give your agent.
There's one big idea that we should talk about. I showed artifacts, which are in Agor and artifact, and as the industry, I think in AI, like a lot of people are talking about artifacts, and the idea of an artifact is that it is likely a JavaScript or a small application that your agent can write, and that application could be a dashboard, or it could be an alternative UI for just about anything, and a means to publish it. And one thing we're talking about in the Superset community is to bring this idea of an artifact as a primitive in Superset. So a dashboard could be a traditional Superset dashboard that has cross-filtering and is very structured. It's themable, right? It offers all the guarantees that we offer with Preset and Superset, but I think we want to bring this new primitive of an artifact, which could be just a dashboard written as a JavaScript application that anyone can can share on Superset or can publish to Superset and consume in Superset with the right security layer around all this.
Yeah, there's a little clickbait title going around about dashboards are dead, and I've got a blog coming soon on my big retort to that. But they're not dead at all. In fact, I think they're just going to be evolving to be even more valuable in new ways. It's also worth mentioning that Preset Chatbot has a lot of this kind of capability to build dashboards for you and with you using just the chat interface natively in Preset. And just using the import export tools can go a long way to kind of doing a semi-manual version of managing these dashboards and assets. And versioning is coming up on the Superset roadmap. That's going to be a factor in a lot of this too. So there's a lot to get into. Maybe we should do a demo around all of this. Let's see. Then another one is somebody's creating or they're looking to create a tool that creates a bunch of different queries to whatever they're working on. They don't go into specifics, uh, but they want their MCP to create charts and dashboards and just push them to a dashboard kind of automatically as part of a workflow. So what are your thoughts on what we're working on that would create kind of this complex dashboard from a prompt and maybe kind of keep populating it with stuff sort of on the fly in an automated way?
Yeah, I can take this one. The vision for Preset MCP, Superset MCP, the Preset Chatbot is giving the power to the agent to do everything that you can do in Superset. And we've had super great results around that, right? So you can today work with the Preset Chatbot or from Claude Code with the Preset MCP to say, create a bunch of charts, or like create, I'm looking to, I want to do this analysis, and the agent is able to write SQL, show you the SQL, create a chart, create multiple charts, you can decide which chart to add to your dashboard. So that's very much possible today. There are some limitations we're working on. So there's a long tail of data visualization that we don't expose through MCP, but the goal is to very much enable every agent through MCP, through Chatbot to do everything that a user can do in Superset. One thing is if you want to create a dashboard that potentially goes beyond what's possible to do in Superset, right? Maybe you want to do something extremely custom or a dashboard where you have a button where you can take action. I think artifacts is the answer to that. And it's coming soon in a future release of Superset.
Mm-hmm. And I think that opens up this whole future with the memory system that you've been talking about and what artifacts are capable of. That it's no longer just a matter of feeding data to your agents to get an answer, but actually the more data and context and all the stuff that you feed to these agents by way of data gives them more actionable stuff to do. So you're actually kind of giving your data agency rather than just giving your agents data. And that does, as someone said, make your dashboards much more dynamic and interactive and all of that.
Actionable, right? Like
Yeah.
actions and dashboard, I think is a big theme. I think for us, we're thinking very actively from going to like where a dashboard is something that is kind of read only that you analyze and then you'll go take action somewhere else. Like we want to enable people to take actions directly from their dashboard. So opening up the definition of what a dashboard is and can be and getting closer to, what an app can do.
Yep. We've only got a couple minutes left. We'll squeeze one more in. I think somebody's asking a good question that needs to be readdressed maybe a little deeper is elaborating more on guardrails and the auditing model. And, in data, I guess the philosophy is that a wrong answer is sometimes worse than no answer. So how do we address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is very much what we're figuring out while we work with agents and not just in data. I think this is applicable to everything. These agents offer a lot of power, but there's a trust question as to like how much can you trust the agent. I think one flow or one idea is around collaboration. So if you're able to share a session with someone who knows more or who can review the session and the trust layer, I think that's very positive. Models are getting better. Often agents do things wrong because they don't have access to the right tools, the right context. But I think very much like in this day and age, the thing that people are trying to figure out is how to work with agents, how to trust them, um, what is the right kind of oversight on top of what they're doing and observability, and then pushing the limits of agency, like what are things that require a human in the loop and what are things that an agent can do on their own. This frontier is moving very quickly.
Yeah, and I think whether you're bullish or bearish, it's probably the right response to have some degree of trust issue. And I think that's what's exciting about this is that this brings the multiplayer aspect to the game. That validation and oversight are still useful in this world. And now that agents can create something, you can riff on it, and I can jump into the fray, and we can validate each other's work and insights, and find all the right answers together. So that's very cool. All right, there are a couple more questions, but we are officially out of time. So by all means, hit up that contact link, which I'm going to drop in the chat one more time. Um, and then we're happy to continue the discussion because there's a lot more we want to hear from you and talk about. So thank you, Max, for showing us around and showing us a little glimpse of what's coming up. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. And, this is not necessarily the end of the conversation. So we're super excited to talk about all this with everyone. So reach in. There's a lot of way to find this. I don't know what's the best way for people to get in touch with Evan and me. Probably GitHub, Superset GitHub, Agor GitHub.
But yeah, find us on Slack. Just go to preset.io and hit the talk to us button.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great day.